guys, I'm gonna be reading Pride and Prejudice, Volume 3, Chapter 3. Let's start now. Yeah, convinced as Elizabeth now was that Miss Bentley's dislike of her had originated in jealousy, she could not help feeling how very unwelcome her appearance at Pemberley must be to her, and was curious to know with how much civility on that lady's side the coincidence would now be renewed. On reaching the house, they were shown through the hall into the saloon, whose northern aspect renders in delightful for summer. Its windows, open into the ground, admitted a most reflection view of the high woody hills behind the house, and of the beautiful oaks. Wait, let me type in this word. I know this word, but I forgot. Oaks. Is it oaks? Oaks. See, oaks and Spanish chestnuts, which were scattered over the intimate lawn. In this room, they were received by Miss Darcy, who was sitting there with Mrs. Hart and Miss Bentley, and the lady with whom she lived in London. And Georgina's reception of them was very civil and attended with all that embarrassment which, through proceeding from shyness and the fear of doing wrong, would easily give to those who felt themselves inferior. The belief of her being proud and reserved, and Mrs. Gardiner and her niece, however, did her justice and pay, pitied her. By Mrs. Hart and Miss Bentley, they were received only by a courtesy on their being seated, a pause awkward as such pauses must always be succeeded for a few moments. It was first broken by Mrs. Annalise Lee, a genteel, agreeable woman whose devour endeavor to introduce some kind of discourse proved her to be most truly well bred than either of the others, and between her and Mrs. Gardiner, with occasional help from Elizabeth, the connection was carried on. Miss Darcy looked as if she wished for courage enough to join in it, and sometimes did venture a short sentence when there was least danger of its being heard. Elizabeth soon saw that she was herself closely watched by Miss Bentley, and that she could not speak a word, especially to Miss Darcy, without calling her attention. This observation would not have prevented her from trying to talk to the letter had they not been seated at an inconvenient distance, but she was not sorry to be spared the necessity of saying much. Her own thoughts were employing her. She expected every moment that some of the governor would enter the room. She feared that the master of the house might be among them, and whether she wished or feared it most she could scarcely determine. After sitting in the manner a quarter of an hour without hearing Miss Bentley's voice, Elizabeth was roused by the receiving from her cold inquiries after the health of her family. She answered with equal indifference, and Viti and others said no more. The next variation which their visit afforded was produced by the entrance of servants with cold meat, cake, and a variety of all the finest fruits in season. But this did not take place till after many a significant look and smile from Mrs. Annalise to Miss Darcy had been given, and to remind her of her post. There was now employment for the whole party, for though they could not all talk, they could all eat, and the beautiful pyramid of grapes, nectarines, and peaches soon collected from the round of the tables. Round soon collected them round the table. While thus engaged, Elizabeth had a fair opportunity of deciding whether she most feared or wished for the appearance of Mr. Darcy by the feelings which preversed, prevailed on his entering the room, and then, though but a moment before she had believed her wishes to be predominate, she began to regret that he came. He had been he has been some time with Mr. Gardiner, who, with two or three other gentlemen from the house, was engaged by the river, and had left him only on learning that the ladies of the family attended a visit to Georgina that morning. No sooner did he appear that Elizabeth wisely resolved to be perfectly easy and unembarrassed, a resolution the more the more necessary to be made, and but perhaps not the more easily kept, because she saw that the suspicions of the whole party were awakened against them, and that there was scarcely an eye which did not watch his behavior when he first came into the room. In no countenance was attentive curiosity so strongly marked as in Miss Bentley's, in the spite of the smiles which overspread her face whenever she spoke to one of its objects, for jealousy has not been yet made her desperate, and her attention to Mr. Darcy were by no means over. Miss Darcy, on her brother's entrance, exhausted herself much more to talk, and Elizabeth saw that he was anxious for her sister and herself to be acquainted, and forwarded as much as possible every attempt at conversation on either side. Miss Bentley saw all this likewise, and in the imprudence of anger, took the first opportunity of saying with wait, let me look this up. Sneering. Ooh, what did I? Oh my goodness. Sorry, guys. Oh, I've missed. Sneering, with sneering civility. Pray, Miss Lizzie, are not the sheer militia removed from Meryton. They must be great loss to your family. Mr. Darcy's present, she dare not mention Wakeing's name, but Elizabeth instantly comprehended that he was upmost in her thoughts, and the various recollection connected with him gave her a moment's distress, but exerting herself vigorously to repel the ill-natured attack, she presently answered the question in a tolerable disengaged tone. While she spoke, an involuntary glance showed her Darcy with an heightened complexion, earnestly looking at her, and his sister, overcame with confusion, unable to lift up her eyes. Had Miss Bentley known what pain she was then giving her beloved friend, she undoubtedly would have restrained from the hand, but she had merely intended to decompose Elizabeth by bringing forward the idea of a man to whom she believed her partial, to make her betray a sensibility which might injure her in Darcy's opinion, and perhaps to remind the latter of all the follies and absurdities by which some of her family were connected with that corpse. Proud. Not a syllable had ever reached her of Miss Darcy's meditated elopement. To no creature had it been revealed which secrecy was possible except to Elizabeth. From all Bentley's connection, her brother was particularly anxious to conceal it. From that very wish which Elizabeth had long ago contributed to him of their becoming hereafter her own, he had certainly formed such a pain, and without meaning that it should affect his endeavor to separate him from Miss Bennet. It is probable that it might add something to his lively concern for the welfare of his son. Elizabeth's collected behavior, however, soon quieted his emotion, and as Miss Bentley, vested and disappointed, dared not to approach nearer to wake him, Georgina also recovered in time, though not enough to be able to speak any more. Her brother, whose eyes she feared to meet, scarcely recollected her interest in the affair, and the very circumstance which had been designed to turn his thoughts from Elizabeth seemed to have fixed them on her more and more cheerfully. Their visit did not continue long after the question and answer above mentioned, and while Mr. Darcy was attending them to their carriage, Miss Bentley was venting her feelings in criticism on Elizabeth's person, behavior, and dress, but Georgina would not join her. Her brother's recommendation was enough to assure her favor. His judgment could not err, but he had spoken in such terms of Elizabeth as to leave Georgina without the power of finding her otherwise than lovely and amiable. When Darcy returned to the saloon, Miss Bennet could not help repeating to him some parts of what she had been saying to his sister. How very ill Eliza Bennet looks this morning, Mr. Darcy, she cried. I never in my life saw anyone so much altered as she is since the winter. She is grown so brown and coarse. Let me look up this word. Course. Louisiana and I were agreeing that we should not have known her again. However, little Mr. Darcy might have liked such an address. He contented himself with coolly replying that he perceived no other altercation than her being rather turned, no miraculous coincidence of travelling in the summer. For my part, she rejoined, I must confess that I never could see any beauty. For my part, she rejoiced, I must confess that I never could see any beauty in her. Her face is too thin, her complexion has no blue brilliancy, see, blue, 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 blue. Oh, okay. Let's look at this word. I know this word. I know I've heard this word before, but let's try. Brilliancy, and her features are not at all handsome. Her nose wants character. There is nothing marked in its line. Her teeth are tolerable, but not out of the common way, and as for her eyes, which have sometimes been called so fine, I never could perceive anything extraordinary in them. They have a sharp, showish look, which I do not like at all. and in her air together. There's a self sufficient there is a self sufficiency without fashion, which is intolerable. Persuaded as Miss Bentley was that Darcy admired Elizabeth, that was not the best method of recommending herself, but angry people are not always wise, and it seemed at look at last look somewhat nettled. She had all the success she expected. He was resolutely silent, however, and from a determination of making him speak, she continued. I remember when we first knew her in her church year, how amazed we all were to find that she was a reputed beauty, and I particularly recollect your saving one night after they had been dining at Netherfield. She is a beauty. I should as soon call her mother with, and afterwards she seemed to improve on you, and I believe you thought her rather pretty at one time. Yes, replied Darcy, who could contain himself no longer, and that was only w- when I saw. Then that was the, and that was only when I first knew her. For it is many months since I have considered her as one of the handsomest women of my acquaintance. He then went away, and Miss Bentley was left to all the satisfactory faction of having forced him to say what gave no one any pain but herself. Mrs. Gardiner and Elizabeth talked of all that had occurred during their visit as they returned, except what they had particularly interested them both. The looks and the behavior of everybody they had seen were discussed, except of the person who had mostly engaged their attention. They talked of all his sisters, his friends, his house, his food, of everything but himself. Yet Elizabeth was longing to know what Mrs. Gardiner thought of him, and Mrs. Gardiner could have. Wait, let me start it. Yes, Elizabeth was longing to know what Mrs. Gardiner thought of him, and Mrs. Gardiner would not have been highly gratified by her needs beginning the subject. Okay, I'm done. I'm gonna be reading the next chapter tomorrow. Yeah, I hope, and I'm so proud of myself. Very, very proud of myself. And I hope you guys have a nice day. Bye bye.